Okay. Let's go to number 2, which was Jalen Green. The Houston Rockets took Jalen Green. Jalen Green has at times looked incredibly explosive and looked like a future extremely high level 25 point per game guy. The thing that he's done really, really well in his sophomore year, in my opinion, he's almost doubled his foul free throw rate, which is fantastic. He's been able to drive to the paint, draw that contact, get easy points. The problem is that I think he has regressed a little bit in terms of like shooting and shot selection. If you look at his effective field goal percentage, it is like quite a bit lower than last year. He had a 50.8 effective field goal percentage last year. He has a 47.7 effective field goal percentage this year. That's a pretty substantial drop when league efficiency is actually up this season across the board. His true shooting percentage is buoyed a bit by that ability to get to the foul line. It's 53.4, but that is still a true shooting percentage that is below average by about 3.5 points compared to league average. Now, that would be okay. The thing that I'm actually worried about is him on defense. I think he's been really, really bad on defense this year. Fighting through screens, his attention to detail on the backside. I really, really don't like what I've seen from him defensively. And on top of it, it really feels like the Houston coaching staff is kind of empowering him without real accountability to do whatever he wants when you watch them. And that is, in my opinion, not the best way to go about developing players. I love the flashes that you see, and I still buy Jalen Green being like a 25 point per game scorer. I just wonder how impactful and efficient and how much it's going to work on like a winning team. I don't think he's a number one option on like a conference finals team, I guess is what I would say. I think they need a centerpiece and like a focal point that kind of works around Jalen really, really well, while also acknowledging that I love the skill level. I love the explosiveness athletically. I love the fact that he's been more aggressive. I just don't love some of the tendencies and like the lack of accountability that seem to be there.
So there's a lot to unpack with that on the defensive end of the floor, Sam. It's the conundrum that you face whenever you draft a really, really talented young player and you build around him a super, super young team, is that there are no veterans, no professionals around to kind of show a guy the ropes, to hold him accountable in that regard. And as a coaching staff for Houston, they've got so many different areas to address, holes to fix, players to try to work through, that the one guy that's going to have the longest leash there is a number 2 overall pick, and the guy who can just go out there and get buckets anyway, that can kind of play through some of those mistakes on the other end of the floor. It's damaging long-term if not handled the right way, if never reeled in appropriately. But this is where I am in terms of not wanting to throw away any Jalen Green stock as a result of this. I think we've seen a lot of hyper-athletic, really, really talented guards and wings come into the NBA over the last half decade or so and struggle on offense initially, carry a really, really heavy offensive burden. And when they mature and when they get good infrastructure around them and other veterans, and they've just gone through the reps enough, they tend to figure it out. I remember hearing many of these same criticisms 3-4 years ago about Devin Booker, a regular season chucker, a guy who put up numbers on a bad team, but he was never going to be able to scale that down offensively, and he was never going to be able to defend well enough in a playoff setting. Well, guess what? The Phoenix Suns made it to the NBA Finals. Anthony Edwards, same criticisms about him. Super athletic, never taps into it on defense. Guess what he did in the playoffs this past year against the Memphis Grizzlies? He looked pretty impressive in terms of his on-ball tendencies. Still a lot to clean up because he's really young, but he's at least made strides in the right direction. I am not ready to give up on Jalen Green in that regard, while also acknowledging it's pretty damn bad right now on the defensive end of the floor. And this is where I wish the Rockets had a couple more adults in the room in terms of guys that they can throw on the floor that are veterans. Maybe it's big men that can make up for that.
Yes.
Just a real like Pat Beverly MF or somebody who's not going to let that slide from a cultural standpoint. Because when you have 8 out of your top 9 guys receiving minutes that are still on their rookie contract, it's a bunch of kids that are really struggling to figure out how to hold themselves accountable versus hold each other accountable. And it's the push-pull dynamic of hitting the reset button. It's why starting from scratch on a team building standpoint is really hard in the NBA. But Jalen Green has the athleticism. He has the tools to be able to figure this out. It's been rough, though. It's been really rough thus far.
Yeah. And I also want to bring up the team context that Jalen Green is in. He doesn't get any easy shots, it feels like. It feels like it is often like my turn, your turn between he and Kevin Porter. I've just like really not liked what I've seen from Kevin Porter in terms of specifically developing a younger group of players that you have a lot of stock in, basically. I think that Kevin Porter kind of tends to turn the ball over a lot. He dribbles the ball a lot. I think that like he's actually like turned into an okay defender, but like, you know, at the same token, I don't know that he's great at it either. He just feels like a great sixth man to me. And instead he's the one that's kind of bringing the ball up the court all the time and like kind of initiating the offense more often than others. And then when Jalen gets his chances, he's not being created those opportunities in advantage situations all that often by Kevin Porter. It's more that Jalen is running out in transition, trying to get opportunities that way, and then having to like create his own in the half court. And because he's so athletic and because he's so explosive, there is real potential for him to do that. He's just not quite there yet in terms of like his craft. And that's okay. He's still super young and has all the tools in the world. I still buy him, like I said, as a 25 point per game guy. I don't know that he's necessarily like a number one option moving forward for a great team. But the good news about Houston is they have an opportunity still high in the draft, because they're going to be picking high in the draft this year, to maybe get that guy next to Jalen Green. Can you imagine? Like, this team makes so much more sense with Victor Wembanyama. You know, Vic is the number one, centerpiece. Then, Jalen Green and Jabari Smith, Jabari being the secondary great defensive player, Jalen Green being the real perimeter shot creator that would work really well next to Victor Wembanyama. Victor Wembanyama and Jabari Smith, like being able to, clean up a lot defensively for some of these guards. It would really, really help, I think. They almost need him more than anyone else, I think, at this point. But
I think Victor helps a lot of teams, though, Sam. He helps a lot.
Maybe Charlotte needs him more than anyone else. I'm sorry, I said that last week. Maybe Charlotte needs him more than anyone else. But Houston's up there in terms of all this. In general, I made my feelings known on Houston last week. I think they need to make a coaching change. I think they need to make some substantive moves to change the dynamic there, including roster moves to bring in vets that can get some easier shots for these guys and bring some accountability. So it's going to be really, really interesting to see how that all plays out moving forward.